LDComics is a women-led Welcoming to All forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallis Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
Today, I'm going to talk briefly about my work, and I'm calling this Science times Comics, a transformative combination. So, as Wallis said, I'm Cara Gormally. There's actually a family debate about how to pronounce my last name. I'm currently over on the Gormally side after spending a lot of the summer swimming with my family. A bunch of us go to the same pool. And so when I go there, I say Gormally because it's like how people at the pool recognize us. Yeah, but I answer to both. A tiny little bit about me. I'm a parent, I'm a cartoonist, I'm a professor, and I'm a researcher. And so the reason why I want to kind of emphasize science is because I think that that is like such a big part of my book, and research is this big part of what makes me this big nerd. And of course, because I'm a cartoonist, I need to do an official comics introduction. So I'm a cartoonist. I'm a biology professor. Tell me about your experiment. I'm a morning person. I'm a fan of long walks. In no particular order, I love chocolate, comics about serious stuff, dubbed books without words by a dear friend, non-dairy ice cream, meditation. Everyone feels this way sometimes. Long talks with friends, yoga, dancing without any skill at all, and deep dives into research. Whoa. And I like to give people kind of like an overview of what I'm talking about. And so I'm going to talk briefly about my book. I'm going to talk about kind of what it was like to write about trauma and therapy, because I think feels like an increasingly common theme in graphic memoirs, and I love to see that. And I want to like acknowledge that it's a lot. I want to talk briefly about my process, and then also about what it's like having my book out in the world. And please stop me if I go over time, because I don't want to. So here's my book. Everything is fine. I'll just work harder. Confessions of a Former Badass. My elevator pitch is essentially workaholic professor embarks on a transformative therapeutic journey after a Facebook friend request resurfaces long buried trauma. And I think even if trauma is kind of not your genre, I think there's really something for everybody in my book, because a lot of this is about how we go through life not really in our bodies, not really grounded, really kind of like do, got to finish these things, got to get through my to-do list. And so I think that it's pretty relatable. So really briefly about my book, because I don't want to spoil the story of my book, but the big thing of my book is that this thing happened that really was a huge upheaval in my life. And I found myself kind of unable to keep going just the way that I had been going. So my life really kind of fell apart as I knew it. I found myself not really able to work in the same kind of way, kept feeling like kind of interrupted by being so overwhelmed. And I think that comics just do this really fantastic way of communicating these feelings and these kinds of events with minimal words. And so I had this really incredible experience in therapy that's really changed my life in so many ways. And I feel like keeps changing my life. It's a little bit like if you've ever seen the movie Jumanji, which is like a Chris Van Allsburg children's book. And these hippos show up and snakes and all of these different things that these kids need to deal with. It feels a little bit like that, like just so many transformations. And so being open to those possibilities. And so after this whole experience, I really found myself just with this like deep need to tell this story. And I think that this is how many people who are writing graphic memoirs feel, that there's something tugging at them. There's this story that is like itching to get out. And for me, I think especially the experience of unpacking shame felt so profound. It just really changed my nervous system and how I am in the world. And so I wanted to write about it. And this story is really about unpacking shame. Shame makes us feel like we're less than, that we're not normal, that we can't be ourselves, that we don't belong. And it's in my book, it's shame about a number of different things. But I think that shame is such a universal experience because we all experience it, and some of us more than others. And I'm nerdily fascinated by it now. And so if you want to know more about it, I did a whole kind of year-long series of comics about shame on my Substack newsletter. So I'd encourage you to check that out. I'm working on different comics there now, but there's like a whole year of work there. And I really wrote this book for younger me, to kind of tend to the younger me's. So I touched on this a little bit, but I want to go deeper into like why graphic memoir. And really, like, for me, I think it's because after trauma, we're left with shards and we're trying to put these pieces back together. And I think that comics do this amazing job of letting us communicate what trauma looks like. It gives us this way to play with the rhythm of the panels and the gutter and what's happening visually. And I think it just makes it so clear for readers. I'm also personally like a giant fan of a visual metaphor. So for example, like here, being on this little hamster wheel is a common theme in my book. The brain kind of being like trying to figure out like what does it need, and trying to make it feel safe. That's another visual metaphor that comes up a lot. And so I think comics really show like how you reauthor this narrative that you're moving through as you're reprocessing trauma. And in some ways, like, for example, in these panels, it's like much more literal. It's like the actual, like, this is kind of the meat of like what's happening in therapy. I think comics are also really awesome because they communicate these kind of disconnected pieces. And trauma's been kind of, one definition that I really like is about thinking of it as all of these kind of disconnections. So the ways that we're disconnected from ourselves and from others. And I think that that's another way that comics like just really wins at showing these kinds of things, at showing emotion with color, at showing emotion that kind of spills over panels. Um, for me, a big part of this too was like learning to be in my body. And so like this little balloon head is another big feature. And comics are also really awesome at showing emotions. And I think I continue to like love comics to show grief. So writing a book about trauma and therapy, I want to really normalize that sometimes it's hard to trust the process. I think when you're deep in it, it's just like you don't necessarily know when you're getting to an end. And sometimes, at least I found, that some of the parts of writing this were harder than others because it felt in a way that I had to touch these really tender spots, these parts that, while they may be, I don't know if I like to use like a past tense of a verb of healed because it feels a little like these are always going to be very delicate sort of spots with scars, essentially, with wounds. And so there's a lot of tenderness that I think we need to like offer ourselves through these processes. It's also really like I found it to be like such a process of feelings, and like recognizing that and like literally the whole feelings wheel, of emotions of like sometimes I felt like I was writing a dissertation again because it can be kind of a lonely process. Sometimes I found myself being really critical. Um, Sometimes just so stressed of like, oh, I have a deadline. Then also lots of like delight because comics, I mean, I I love making them, and also like the actual delight of realizing like, whoa, this thing is going to be out in the world. I just saw my book out in the world again this weekend, and it's just like it's a little magical to see it out there. I ended up just feeling like I've learned so much from being in this process, especially now that I'm like writing some more new things and the importance of like finding ways to be grounded here in the now while you're working on this project that maybe that feels very heavy. I found for myself, like I needed to leave my house physically. I needed to go on walks. I needed to notice really small things like this picture here of this tree. I took a picture of it because I was like looking deeply at like the flowers and being like, oh, wow, look at those petals. It's also beautiful. This mural, this like cat graffiti always makes me feel delighted when I walk past it. It just sort of like looks like it's springing up from the ground. So for me, I felt like, oh, I really need to like ground myself so that I have a foot here in the here and now, even as I'm working on this really hard thing. I think too that for me, the graphic is part of the medicine. And it's like a way that I super nerd out on exploring these questions. I think I found in deciding to put this out in the world, it was like another level of leveling up and reckoning again with shame and thinking about like what does it mean if people shame me for doing this work? Because it's just so multi-layered. But I think the more that I could feel that I was like putting sunshine on the shame and showing it, the less power it had over me. And I also just then got like so curious, like meta curious about, I was like, wow, shame is yucky, but like shame is also like fascinating, like why we even have it. Um, if you're curious more, more about like what this is like, last year I did a roundtable for a sequential artist workshop and it's on YouTube and people, including Natalie, people were there and other authors and had great things to say about like what it was like to work through their own graphic memoirs, about trauma and therapy. And that was actually before my book was out and I was still in the midst of making it. And it was really helpful because I was in one of those periods of like, whoa, this is a hard thing to do this work. And so I found like a lot of inspiration from everybody else's experience. So my process, okay, it looks like I'm doing okay in time for right now. Um, I really think of this as like, again, like kind of multi-layered. And I see one of my critique group members here, and I feel like whenever I use a Venn diagram, like it feels like a shout out to her now. So thank you, Carol, for like inspiring Venn diagrams. Um, I think it's really like this whole process is, about emotional, like very much about the emotional part of it. Also about materials, like figuring out what works for you, and also logistical and time management, because most of us don't pay our bills by making comics, which is unfortunate because like that's my dream. So for me, like in terms of the materials, I tend to start making thumbnails on paper, although I did end up moving to thumbnails on my iPad using Procreate because it ended up getting simpler and simpler to just purely stay in Procreate. But this is kind of my first attempt at telling a story, and I'm making these tiny little thumbnails without very much information, just enough so that I know what I need to do next. I love using index cards to organize pages because then I can shuffle them around if I need to. And I think it also has helped me to really make things less precious so that if it doesn't work, I'm not so like clinging to it or clutching at it. I ink and color in Procreate. And yeah, that's kind of the materials part of it. I also want to mention though that like this, I'm talking about Cartoonist me, but like everything is connected. And I think that my work as a researcher like very much informs my comics. Um, it's just kind of like these questions that make me want to go in and like keep going. And so for me, a big part of my process is not only the art process, but also diving into literature. And so I have this whole process of having way too many tabs open on my computer, reading a lot until I've kind of gotten the questions satiated, and keeping notes in a notebook. And then I go back and figure out what is useful. And so a lot of my book kind of interweaves these pieces from research into the book, and that's how that part got done. And so a tiny bit about like what this then looked like. I began this comics project, had a totally different name at that point. In 2021, I'd been drawing comics for a few years, mostly for myself, some for Mother Magazine and other outlets, especially through doing IVF. But I started to find that making a book was like a more uphill. It was just lonely, and I really miss seeing people. And this is, I think, where the power of community really came in.
Cara, can I just stop you there? Did you mean
Sure.
to stop your screen because we're not seeing any more
Oh no,
slides?
it says I'm sharing screen sharing.
Is
I
that
think.
The
I
slides.
still see it. Oh,
Oh,
no,
it's
Okay,
just
let
me
me try
then.
it again.
No, it's probably just me. I think if everyone else can see, it's fine. It's just me. Carry
Share.
on. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
thank you.
Can you see it now, Wallis?
I can. Yeah,
Oh,
brilliant.
good. Okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so I really started to find like I was like, wow, this is really hard to make this longer form thing alone. And so I found Sequential Artist Workshop, and it was just such a game changer. And it made the process this deeply communal process in some ways because I got this feedback and support in doing this. And I mean, just like it was just so incredibly helpful, and I can't recommend it like enough. So very briefly, as I wrap up, what is it like to have my book out in the world? It's been like such a joy. Like I'm like, whoa, here it is. I mean, this picture on the right is one of my favorite local bookstores. I went in after a colleague was like, hey, your book's like on display, and signed a bunch of books for them. It's just like this picture on the bottom. I literally feel like that is what my face looks every time. When I see it out in the wild, I'm still like, wow, like, it's kind of amazing to see it out there. And, oops, I meant to update that. Yeah, so there's more things coming up, and I would love for people to join them with me. Yeah, I think the other thing I do want to say is about having the book out in the world is it is a story about past me. And so that is like, I think that's another thing to think about when you're making comics and when you're making a graphic memoir, that there's also that keeping your foot in like current life too. And so now for me, and I know Natalie and I've talked about this, of like the like feeling of like the deep care of like having that book, like it feels like it holds a lot in some kind of way. And then yet also being like, oh, like, but this is actual me, and there's things there and there that are storified, and so it's a really interesting kind of contrast and like living with both of those realities. So I'm happy to answer questions about that too.
And are you guys seeing the whole thing? Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm Natalie Norris. I'm also a graphic memoirist, and there are a lot of themes that are parallel between my work and Cara's work. And like they said, we have done some panels together. I wrote a blurb for their book, and so you'll see some repeating themes, just from a slightly different angle. So I'm a graphic memoirist. I have one graphic memoir out, Dear Minnie Book One, and I also am a diary cartoonist. And I'll talk about sort of how that I see that as a very different practice than long form memoir work. I'm a teacher. I run a summer workshop at the Center for Cartoon Studies. And I also do one-on-one mentorship. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely reach out to me. And I'm a comics librarian at the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is in Vermont. And it's a really magical place to get to spend my time immersing myself. So I'm going to talk about my work and also read a couple excerpts as I go. So I'll start with this one. It's a short comic called Fool's Errand. So you want to make a graphic memoir, the story of my pain and growth. You want to create a container for the past that others can witness. You want to tuck it away and take it out all at once. You want to lay your pain to rest by bringing it back to life. Can you embrace this fool's errand? Can you accept that it will not take you where you plan to go? Can you trust that wherever you land, this is your journey? Can you pick yourself up and walk into the unknown? So I made that comic when I was reflecting on the process of what it was like to put out my graphic memoir, Dear Minnie. And Dear Minnie Book One came out in July of 2023. So it's been a little over 2 years. It was published with Fantagraphics books. And it's been a really intense journey. I think some of the things that Cara mentioned, and the questions you guys had, are very real. It's incredibly vulnerable. And for me, I'd had a lot of therapy, but I'm not sure that there's anything that would have fully prepared me for putting this level of vulnerability out into the world, because at its core, it was a story about a secret and something that I hadn't really talked about, even to people close with me. I might have said a little bit. So it was very revealing all at once as my first book. So that was very intense. And the story focuses on a period during my adolescence when I had a number of very traumatic experiences with sexual violence. And it's written as a letter to my friend Minnie, who I met when I was actually in Europe, and she's Austrian and I'm American. So it's also about sort of international friendship and the way different cultures come together. But it ultimately looks at how the impact of rape culture on teenage girls. So we'll read from the introduction. It says, Dear Minnie, isn't it strange how time works? How it's been 12 years and yet we both still think of each other. Vermont and Vienna, Austria. How we can grow up and yet I will always remember you from when we first met. You not yet 16, me newly 17, but we had all the men fooled. Maybe what's most strange is that we've been having the same difficult conversation for 7 years. Sometimes it feels like we occupy opposite sides of the same coin. Do conversations like these have an end? Will it ever not feel harrowing to face you? I want to find reconciliation. I want to show you my side of the coin. Will you come back with me to the moment when our lives collided? So since Dear Minnie Book One came out, I've done a number of mini comics. I have I think most of them here. You can see And I've also started a diary comics practice. And I really like working in short form and long form. I know for a lot of people, there's a sense like, oh, once you get a graphic novel, like that's kind of the ultimate goal. Like that's the pinnacle of what cartooning is. But I really think that there's so much to be learned every time you make something and self-publish it or work with a small press. And you can really hone your craft when you do shorter stories. So one that I did here, it's out with Paper Rocket Mini Comics. That's just like a micro press. And it's part of a series where they each person does a story. It's under 60 pages about from the perspective of their childhood self or adolescent self. So the narration is from your younger self, which I think is pretty unique because often memoir is very reflective. So my story takes place right when I turned 16, so before my big book, and it's about being in a hospital program for kids and dealing with sort of that medical trauma by distracting myself with being in love and obsessed with my older sister's boyfriend. So as you can see here, it says, I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend, sue me. I started doing diary comics, and this is what I've been doing a lot of now. And I started this practice at the end of 2023, so a couple months after my book came out. And this was when I met my partner. And it had been many years since I'd had a serious relationship. And so this all felt very new and raw. So I turned to my trusty coping mechanism, which is comics and art, and I started drawing these little black and white snapshots. And it was a way to capture what was unfolding in real time and in the present, because I'd done so much work dissecting the past. And that's a very different experience than recording what's happening right now. So I put these together into a little collection. And then I did a second collection, which was what I was part of the LDC online comics fair. So this was with my life, and it has some longer pieces and is also in color. So that was fun to get to do. And I have a print copy, which I will be selling this fall. And so this collection explores how past trauma impacts relationships and intimacy. I think it's playful and sweet, but it also delves into some of the darker moments. And so this page reads, the first month when we were dating, I was so confused, but I was so into you and I couldn't tell how you felt. There were a lot of mixed messages. Well, that's because I was so confused. I could sense it, but you kept agreeing to go out again. So I was like, okay, there's hope. And I was so guarded. I felt like I was dancing naked in a garden, and I was like, you've got to come in here. It's amazing. And I was like, oh, that looks really nice, but it's probably a trap. So here's a longer piece from the same collection. Wow, it's going to be so pretty when the moon comes up over the trees. Do you think it'll rise that fast? Oh, yeah, the moon's always bopping around. So I've been thinking about how screech, rev vroom, chatter, drunk men's voices. Ema, I'm scared. I'm sure it's okay, but yeah, I don't feel great about this. Let's go. Sway, I've got you. They're gonna get me. I'm gonna die. Can't see them. Where are they? What will they do to me? Drunk, want to get me, hurt me, going to die. Going to get us. Rumble, rumble, rumble. It's probably just some drunk kids. Am I safe? Locked door. Click. Did he lock his door? Don't look. Please don't block the road. As long as I don't see them, I'll be okay. Phew. Whoa, babe, look at the moon. Ooh, I want to paint it. Back at home, doze. Babe, I'm having a lot of anxiety because of the drunk guys. Mm-hmm. Um, Babe, if something were to happen, if someone would try and hurt me, would you protect me? Oh, baby, with my life. With my life. So I've also been doing another type of reflective sort of memoir project called Dear Reader. And as you can tell, I love to work with doing things as letters. I find that's like a really easy way to narrow my focus and like the way that I sort of narrate and talk. And I've been sending those out on Patreon. Actually, I've been printing them and sending it snail mail, which has been a fun thing to do. And it's been interesting to work with putting in more words than text. So they're not really in panels, it's more of an illustrated letter. So I'll read you this. Dear reader, I had planned to focus this letter all on my trip to California. I've been to LA a few times, but this visit I found myself particularly wowed by the flowers, architecture, so many little tower houses, and of course, the ocean. And yet, all of this beauty was thrown into sharp relief against ongoing and impending natural disasters. My sister, damn, it looks like we can't really get to Malibu from here because Route 1 is still closed from the fires. Let's try Palos Verdes instead. Wow, I'm so glad we came here. It's stunning. Me too. Apparently, this whole area is having huge mudslides and eventually will fall into the ocean. Oh, my friend Kathy. When I saw the hills on fire, I was like, nope, this is too Mordor. It's the end. Ding. Oh shit, another fire just started. Sage, does anxiety about the big earthquake get to you? Yeah, it costs a lot to live in LA, both literally and mentally. Growing up as a kid in Tornado Alley, natural disasters have always been a place where my anxiety fixates. Iowa City. Why is the sky green? Kids, quick, get in the car, let's go. So, despite loving all our SoCal adventures, my nervous system was really looking forward to returning to the safety of Vermont. Whoa, the San Andreas Fault is right down there. Ah, it says during big earthquakes, the ground can move up to 30 feet up and down. No. So each month, or each time I do these letters, I focus on a theme or I try and explore an emotion, and then I connect it to something that was happening at that I've been going through at the time. So, for example, this first one was about rock climbing and how that was a really helpful way to get unstuck and become more present in my body. Then there was one about discovering mold in my room and how dealing with that mirrored aspects of my mental health and sort of being in that freeze state. And then most recently, the one I just read an excerpt from, I was looking at the impact of natural disasters and the impending climate catastrophe on our psyches while I was visiting my sister in California. And the sort of ironic part is I had all this anxiety while I was there, only to come back to Vermont and experience a small natural disaster. We had a sudden microburst and it sort of wreaked havoc in our neighborhood. So that project helped me to find a way to approach this other project, which is a nonfiction comic. And it's looking at the impact of sexual violence. And this is through the Center for Cartoon Studies has a graphic guide series, and they're short nonfiction comic books that look at different topics from democracy to mental health. I think they have one coming out on climate change. And so it's been an interesting departure from my regular memoir work, and it's helped me to think about exploring the impact of trauma and resilience in new ways. And you can see how the illustrated letter that I was doing, the Dear Reader letter, has helped to create the stylistic approach to this work, which was definitely something I struggled with, trying to figure out how do you fit all this text and yet make it readable and flow and feel like it still looks like a comic, even if there's more text than images. And I'm really hoping that this comic will be something that's accessible and distributed by organizations that deal with gender-based violence advocacy and also schools, so that it can reach people outside of the comics community, because it's really just for people in general. So that comic also leads into what I'm working on with Dear Minnie Book 2, because that story ultimately deals with the impact of sexual violence. And I found that making the memoir itself, it changes your relationship to those events. And it also changes you as a person. So I had an initial draft for book 2 that I wrote back in 2020. When I wrote book 1, I wrote it as one big story. But I've changed so much since then. And it's been a slower process of letting my life unfold while also reflecting on what I've learned and how I've continued to heal and grow. And so, what it is I want to say with the second story has changed. And so, I'm still working on the draft of this one. And I'll read the intro that I have the draft pages for you. Minnie, since I started this letter to you, my hair has grown as long as it was when we last saw each other 15 years ago. From the outside, I look more or less the same, but internally, the difference is profound. It can be difficult to reconcile that the things I have told you and the things that I am about to tell you are part of my story, when my life looks so different now. Somewhere along the way, things shifted. Gradually, then all at once, then gradually again, and so on. The events of the past remain fixed, but our relationship to them is always changing, which means this letter is filtered through where I am today, a perspective eternally in flux. But I will try to show you, as I felt it then, how it all unfolded to bring me here. Will you come back with me again to the moment when our lives divided? So, as I mentioned in the beginning, I also teach, and the past 3 summers, I've taught a 5-day intensive workshop at the Center for Cartoon Studies up here in Vermont in the US. And I developed this course around the questions and struggles I encountered while making my book, Dear Minnie. There were a lot of elements about making work about trauma that I didn't see people at the time addressing. So I created this curriculum that gets into craft choices and strategies for approaching stories that deal with trauma and illness and adversity. And it's interesting because Cara mentioned that it seems like just in the past few years, there's been this sort of boom of people really both making work about trauma, but also connecting with other creators to discuss the challenges. I've been on a number of panels at conventions that deal with this. So it's definitely something that I think has like bubbled up in the collective unconscious, and all of a sudden a lot of people are interested in this work, which I think is really awesome. And one of the most rewarding aspects for me teaching this class has been to see the way that the students bond with each other and really hold space for any story that someone wants to tell. There's no sense of shame for bringing up something that's heavy because they're all there for it. It's sort of an even playing field in terms of the emotional stakes. And I've seen such beautiful camaraderie that it's really fortified my belief in how powerful this medium and community can be. So I also like to work one-on-one with people, and it's awesome that we have Zoom, so that makes it accessible. I work with a lot of students who've taken my class or found my work somewhere online, but I also work with people who are totally new. And I sometimes they have books that they're working on, other times they want to just learn, they sort of have the dream of a book and they want to like figure out, you know, what is the trajectory, what are comics basics. And I really love helping people figure out the best way to tell their story and really hone in on how to develop their unique voice and practice, because what I've learned is that it's just so different for each person, and the way that I would, you know, imagine them telling it after we meet a number of times, it's clear it's like, oh no, like they have a different approach, and my favorite thing is being able to figure that out with them and help them follow that through. So lastly, if you'd like to stay in touch or see my recent work as I'm putting it out, I mostly use Patreon. I've thought about maybe doing a Substack, since that seems to be the thing that people are into nowadays. But I have Patreon. I have pretty much all of my diary comics have been shared there at one point, so you would have access to them. And I also send out the Dear Reader letter on through the mail, and so that's been a fun project. And eventually, when I start to do the final art for Dear Mini Book 2, I'll be serializing it there, which is what I did for Dear Mini Book 1. So that's what I have for you guys. And now I'd love to hear any questions.
Oh, hi everyone. Thank you. And I just want to say thanks so much, Cara and Natalie, because yeah, so much of that resonated, and I'm still thinking and lingering on some of the Q&A around the choice to write something difficult and the choice to put it out there. So yeah, both talks just made this introduction a lot easier, actually. So I'm Moi. My name literally means plum. Or plum blossom if you want the more symbolic interpretation. But you'll see my name underneath Chi Gui Moi, which is my origin language Ngai, or in Cantonese it's Chui Gui Moi. So you see those 3 characters attached to my name in quite a lot of places. But you can just call me Moi here. And yeah, thanks for having me. I'm hoping to share a bit about my practice and to speak a bit about AI, which is the first thing I've made and put out there. So I've never made a comic before, sort of visual narrative in that way before. And I've never worked digitally either in sort of putting something like that in digital form. So yeah, I'll start. Oh, it's not moving. Hold on, let me just find my slidey thing. Okay, I'll use the cursor. So a bit about me and my practice. I've just put a jumble of pictures up there. I still find it quite hard to describe my practice, so I tend to describe it in things that and through things that I actually enjoy doing. So I like a lot of doodling, a lot of meandering lines, love birds and nature, lots of slow mornings, zooming in on slow details. So if you ever see me on a train, quite often I'm kind of facing looking out the window and watching the scenery and also the little dirt droplets from the raindrops and seeing all the worlds within worlds there. I like dreams, and I like some of the images and responses that I get from dreams, talking to strangers. And I've put something here about serious weight and silly string because for years I wrestled with this kind of like this style or persona of mine, because I tend to go quite deep with quite serious topics and quite heavy topics. And then there's also a very sort of silly nonsense side to me, and both appear in all parts of my work. And for ages, I really wrestled with that. Oh, do I have to be one or the other? So I just really wanted to name that there because I think an earlier version of myself would have liked to have seen that and to seen that. You can just doodle some potatoes and some nonsense 1 minute and then go somewhere completely different elsewhere. What else? Yeah, so in terms of the things I work with, I like a lot of scalpel work, a lot of cutting, collage, watercolor, ink, and generally words and pictures. So I like to think of pictures or metaphors as like my 3rd or 4th language. So I grew up speaking Ngai with my family, and I learned English at school. And English has now become my sort of most fluent language, but I have all these other languages around me. So it's kind of this patchy multilingual landscape that I live in, and images and symbolisms being and metaphor especially is something that yeah, is really dear to me because I feel like myself speaking in that language. So moving on to AI, and what I put out through the LDC comic fair recently was actually subtitled Lighting Up the Mirror to Racism. So I'll share a bit about that and how that came about. Because originally the idea for AI came from my fidgeting with artificial intelligence and creativity, and some of the big themes around that and how divisive it is and how it felt for me personally. So I'll just say a bit more about that before I move on to the actual comic that went out. So on the left, you'll see a bit of a title page. So it's just scanned from my sketchbook. So a lot of the stuff that I've put in the AI comic is actually scanned from lots of notebooks and sketchbooks. A bit of it was produced for the actual final piece in itself and had self-contained pieces, but a lot of what I used was actually already in existence in piles and piles of sketchbooks. And AI came about really because it was quite a lively topic in some of my work. So outside of this screen and what sort of my personal practice, I do quite a bit of work in facilitating, holding spaces and groups, and illustrating for events as well. So trying to find meaning and help people find meaning and make sense of stuff. And one of the things that kept coming up was AI, in that it was the conversation that everyone was having, but there was really no space or any gatherings for people to think about it beyond the fear of it, the technical aspect of it, like this whole question about, you know, what does this mean in terms of the questions we might want to ask about how do we want to live as people, and how does AI mirror how we are, and what choices do we want to make about how we want to be. All of that thoughtfulness didn't seem to be coming out in quite a lot of the sort of open spaces and events that I was attending and hearing people talk about. So this original idea for the AI comic, and I've now decided that AI will be like a series. So I'm going to share with you the actual draft, the free write that I did that inspired AI in the first place, so that I hopefully I'll follow up with a part 2 or 3 of AI and subtitle it a comic on AI and creativity. I'm going to try and squint into my screen because I don't have another one of these written out in front of me. So this free write came from a sort of random drop-in I made at my local sort of writers group. And there was a prompt given for some writing for like 10-15 minutes writing called Sticky Little Fingers. So I took that as a prompt, and this is what I wrote. And the machine won't know, will it, how it feels to spill and splat that coffee over the page as your shoulders hunch, crouch and contort over the page, engrossed, how hours can pass and you need those Watsits stalled on the side, how clumsily you shove them in your mouth, smudge that sticky orange mark on your pencil, how little its finger can get, how sticky they get, pulling and tugging on the edges of your own thoughts. It won't feel the release of that breath that you didn't know it was holding, what it's like to admire a baby snail sucking on the droplet of a leaf after a day's rain. It won't know how it feels seeing your craft excavated or bloated and emptied out, there to consume all those unearned empty calories, the bloated emptiness of the machine itself. Will it ever be intelligent enough to see itself through its own windows, mirrors, and spirals? Will it ever be sensitive enough to feel afraid of itself, to feel fear and fear itself, and become like us, wielding and pelting our shit everywhere else because there is no safe landing place? Will it ever be as limp and lifeless and disconnected as we have become? Or will it also learn to fidget with the fear, learn to hold a stick into the sand, a pencil in hand, and bring body, shape, contour, colour, life, and landscape to its own void? Yeah, so that was the original plan for AI, really, and I still have images of that snail sucking on that droplet of water as like this really widespread in my mind. And yeah, just even the shapes and the pacing and density of that still dancing a bit around in my mind. But I just wanted to share that because that's yeah, it was quite a big detour, but also not very different in what I produced in the end for AI. And I found that doing this, my brain doesn't really work in a linear way, or the way in which I thought you produced and finished something was, oh, right, you have an idea, then you sit down and then you drink a bit of coffee and persevere, and then you sort of work towards a deadline, and voila. And obviously it's not as straightforward as that. But for me, the process of producing the first part of AI, lighting up the mirror to racism, was very different, actually. It just wasn't what I expected at all. So it came about really through a combination of many years of just being quite alive to seeing things and feeling things and bringing the two together. And I've been holding quite a lot of work, a lot of sketches and things in notebooks, really for my own pleasure, for my own satisfaction. And it was, you know, cathartic in its own way. Here you'll see a few pages from the AI comic or visual narrative. I think it's not. I think people found it quite hard to define it as a comic. But yeah, so the contents there, the structure really emerged as I was doing it. And what happened was I was just paddling, as I call it, like just creating and mark making and paddling, and I'll be doing that in some shape or form on a daily basis. And then it just so happened that with the LDC deadline looming, and once I decided to change course and do this instead, it just kind of paddled out in the way that it did. So anyone that's read it, that's what happened at that point in time. And had I started from a different point or made different decisions, or my intention was, if I'd followed my original intention more closely, you probably wouldn't have seen what you see in that version. So this is one of the spreads in the comic. It features quite early on, but it was one of the ones I did last, and I wasn't sure if I'd actually do it. And it was because LDC extended the deadline by a week, and I felt that I'd finished the comic, and I decided actually I do want to include this. And it is a version of actually what happened in my decision to make this comic. So I'll just read out what it says on the screen. What's changed? 2020, clap for carers. Hashtag Blackout Tuesday, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag BLM. Protests in response to murders of and brutality towards other humans. 2024, feed the carers. Far-right violence and fire to other humans in response to their migration and refuge. Would this have happened if all lives really mattered? Yeah, and it was actually one of the hardest ones to start, this spread, but once I got started, and I think the firm press of the scalpel and sticking of the glue and the tactileness of that really helped. But this kind of symbolizes why I changed course from the original idea of AI, even though quite a lot of the themes do overlap. So what happened was in April in the UK, we had a bit of a heat wave and the sun came out, and it felt really unexpected. And I just had this really unwelcome sensation in my body, like I just didn't enjoy the sun on my skin at all. And as I was reflecting a bit more about this, I realised that the last time I felt this kind of heat in the UK was August last year. And it was during the violent rioting and the fire being thrown on hotels and homes homing asylum seekers. And it just brought back quite a lot of memories and what it felt like at the time, like this sense of this discordancy of this summer and the anticipation of all these sort of the socializing, the sunshine, the ice cream, all of that stuff, and being outside, and then having this feeling in my body that just was a real menace to my attention. And I just remember sort of sitting at home and sketching a few things out just to really empty it out and walk it out of my head, really. And I've got a note of it here because I didn't include it in the actual slides because it's quite personal, but I'll read out a bit of what there was. So the there and then with the violent headlines. I've written here sandals or trainers, comfort or safety, relaxed feet or running feet. Because I remember there was just this one moment where it just felt so ridiculous and absurd that I was planning a train journey to Clacton-on-Sea. And I was really nervous about it. I was actually really afraid. And I remember packing my bag thinking, am I going to pack trainers so I can run if I need to? Or am I going to pack sandals because it's actually really hot and my feet would be more comfortable in sandals? And I just couldn't believe I was making that decision. And I still sort of think back at it now and just think like that was normal. I mean, that's still normal in so many ways. But it kind of led me to this quite long journey with this thinking about, you know, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, like some of these sort of responses that we have as humans to something that feels really threatening or when we feel afraid. And something in me just drew out light, the light in flight. And it's possible that it's not just possible, light is illuminating, light is fragile, it can flicker, it can whisper. It's got so many more dimensions to those 4 responses. And so in that way of feeling trapped and oscillating between those responses and feeling quite stuck and quite choiceless in my situation, I just chose light, I think. And then that's why I changed the course of this, because I realized that quite a lot of this writing and drawing is being kind of weighed down in my sketchbooks. I was not quite looking forward to moving on with life, and I had this ravaging my attention. So that's basically the story of how AI came about in the way that it did. I've just got my eye on the time, so time is like sand. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm just going to move through these slowly without saying too much, and hopefully they'll just speak for themselves. We live in a world built on domination and oppression. We inhabit it, inhabits us, slowly, quietly, until we lose sight of it. Nerve endings rattle to despair, emptiful, fists tight, unable to let go, feet stilted, frozen. It's just a great compression. The rocks are in my head. I'm still on the floor, and yet I'm still here. It's a few pictures of just some of the material that I've just been compiling over the years that didn't really go anywhere or just started as starting gestures. Like there's just a few things there about heavy heads and fragile bodies. And in so many ways, I think the whole AI thing and feeling quite disturbed and quite angry actually, and quite helpless with it. There was something around, yeah, I guess just being able to explore that. And just being able to highlight that in some ways and release that on the page. And then on the right there, that's one of my tube sketches, and just me being a bit annoyed with our third limb. I call mobile phones our third limb because it's kind of useful, but it gets in the way. So yeah, it's just a lot of meandering about that really, and just feeling quite dislocated from this kind of dystopian feeling around us. On the left there, just a doodle of the dirt raindrops on train windows that I mentioned earlier. So I do love exploring worlds within worlds. And then as that's happening, something might just come up like a sentence like this: hard crust. History repeats itself in the shape of heavyweight brutality. Each sharp edge hardens another. So yeah, there's quite a lot of anguish, I think, in some of that. And I think what I'm showing here is one of my favorite spreads actually in the entire comic. I could spend hours talking about this, but I won't. But for me, this is kind of embodies this idea of hard crust and soft yolk, and what I mentioned earlier around each sharp edge hardening another, and the malice of history and the brutality of that. There was something for me about it's so easy to get caught up in it and to feel inhabited by that, actually, for that to creep in, like even with good intentions and wanting to celebrate love, you know. And what I found with a lot of anti-racism work, it can replicate a lot of the issues that it's seeking to dismantle unwittingly. And what I missed was, especially in the public dialogue, is that anti-racism work and actually any anti-ism work, when you peel underneath and go deeper, there's a more compelling question around, you know, what does it mean to love and what does it mean to be loved? And I think that is just this thing that doesn't really get much attention. And I think what happened in sort of the months leading up to producing AI and what happened here, and this is like 3 separate pieces or instances of work that just came together in this way. It wasn't intended to be like this at all. It's a watercolor I did with my friend Pam, who's actually talking next month at LDC about her comic, What Happened to My Senses. But I was sitting with her because we just wanted a little bit of a breather and a break and enjoy the process of producing something. And the words here is something that came out in April because I got quite upset, actually. I got quite upset with my relationship with the sun. And it says, what just happened? Some salt from my mouth finally dripped out of my eyes. And so it's, for me, that's a bit of the journey from that kind of angry, more easy to touch exterior of anger and the sadness that's masquerading as anger. I'm just looking at the time, Wallis. So what I'll do is just say a couple of things about each one and speed through. This is like a patchwork of lots of different things. And I think in terms of the light in flight, I think this is where this started to really take shape. Refugees, survivors are expert light seekers, forever on the edge of living, embodying the frailty that humanity can't face. We wove this in ourselves, gender, race, class, so can we weave it out? Squashed to the border, changed the story. And then there's an embedded bit there, which is a story of its own, which is racism is illegible to those who benefit from it, which is, I think, part of my journey in accepting that it's illegible. So I keep knocking on that door, convincing people and proving that it exists. Just grow what's good, just grow what's good and keep doing that. I think that was really my strategy from there on. So coming to the end now, I just want to say that the AI process was very cathartic. It was entirely self-serving. It was trying to put something out of my way to get out of my own way because it was consuming so much of my intention and my body and my energy. And so I used this LDC thing as an opportunity to complete something and walk something out of my sketchbooks and out of my own space and put it out there, really. And it seemed quite easy because I felt very held in a process in terms of things were just flowing and it just paddled out. So it didn't really feel like there was much tension and just, you know, discerning what to include, how to do it. I left mistakes and I left all sorts of blurry splodges in. It was just what it was. But the thing that I'm more compelled by and the thing I'm more pulled by is my own story and my family's story. So I mentioned something about refugees earlier, and there's quite a lot of tendrils to what is happening out there that is very personal and is always out there, and it's very hard to switch off from. And so Squash the Border Changes the Story actually originated from a sketchbook drawing on the left there, another doodle in the middle, memory and story. And then on the right, the first ever portrait I've ever done of my family, and actually the only one. And that was like a 30-second doodle of just feeling something out. And it's one of my favorite drawings. And so that's where it leaves me really and what I want to focus on, because I feel like that's been the main calling and why, as to why I draw and what I want to produce. And I think I've come to accept that it's going to take like 20 or 30 years or whatnot to hear it and to feel my way around it. But I just wanted to end by saying, by just showing 2 pictures, just to lighten the mood a bit, as I like to do. Just a nice drawing of an apple, just some of the more meditative drawings that I like to do, and just some little potatoes, because why not? And yeah, so thank you, and bye for now. I've included a link tree there so you can see if you're interested in any other parts of my work and sort of the more commissioned work I do for other people beyond my personal practice. That's all out there as well. And feel free to reach me on my email if you have any questions or just want to chat about any of this. Always up for a meandering chat. And while I'm here, I should do a quick plug. Oh, looking at the time.
It's fine. It's fine.
One of the other projects that I'm working on that feels really personal and really, really matters to me actually is something called the Mother Lode. So it's an exploration of maternal lineage and people sharing stories, and people self-select. So anyone can do this and be interviewed or share their story with me or my partner, Jamie. And we're trying to record and capture these stories about people's ancestry and their maternal lines and what lives in the present that's still in the past. So we're just wanting to make sure there's a place for that. So that's what that project's about. And Jamie, my project partners, started at that, and I'll be taking over the listening exercise as of September. So I'm putting it out there now because I'm due to get more information about that in the next week or so. So if you're interested, please email me because it's just a lively, lovely piece of work that I'd like to keep doing.